My name is Avery, and I'm 32 years old. On the surface, I run a successful digital marketing agency in downtown Seattle with 15 employees and clients across 3 states. But in my family's eyes, I have always been the forgotten middle child, the one who never quite measured up to their expectations. Last Christmas, as we gathered around my childhood dining table, my mother looked me straight in the eye and said the words that had been hanging in the air for years. "You are the biggest disappointment we have." Everyone went silent. That was the moment I finally found my voice and spoke a truth that would shatter our family's carefully constructed lives forever. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if toxic family dynamics during the holidays sound familiar, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up to family members who refuse to see your worth. Growing up in the suburbs of Portland, I always felt like a background character in someone else's story. My older brother Justin was the golden child from birth. Tall, charismatic, and naturally gifted at sales, he was the kind of person who could charm anyone within minutes of meeting them. Every family dinner revolved around his latest business venture or impressive commission check. His awards and certificates covered every available surface in our living room, and conversations inevitably centered on his achievements or upcoming opportunities. My older sister Nicole held the second highest position in our family hierarchy. She was everything my mother Maria valued: traditional, well-mannered, and devoted to creating the perfect domestic life. Nicole married her college sweetheart at 24, had her first baby at 26, and settled into the role of devoted wife and mother with what appeared to be complete fulfillment. My mother would constantly reference her during our phone calls. "Nicole just redecorated their entire guest room by herself," or "Nicole's homemade bread won first place at the church bake sale." Then there was Bella, 7 years younger than me and the undisputed baby of the family. From the moment she entered the world, she could do no wrong. Every tantrum was dismissed as personality. Every failure was reframed as finding herself. When she dropped out of college for the second time, my parents called it exploring different paths. When she maxed out her credit card on designer clothes, they paid it off without question and bought her a new wardrobe as a reward for being honest about her spending. And there I was, Avery, caught somewhere in the middle of all this family theater. I was neither the charismatic achiever, nor the perfect homemaker, nor the precious baby who needed constant protection. I was the quiet one who spent hours analyzing market trends and building digital campaigns, lost in my own world of data analytics and creative strategy. My report cards were filled with straight A's throughout high school and college, but they never generated the same excitement as Justin's sales awards. My marketing campaigns won industry recognition, but those achievements never made it to the refrigerator door alongside Bella's finger paintings from elementary school. My mother Maria was the driving force behind our family's rigid dynamics. Raised by immigrant parents who valued traditional success above all else, she had very specific ideas about what constituted achievement and how children should honor their parents. She was quick to compare, criticize, and correct anyone who stepped outside her narrow definition of success. When I announced my decision to study digital marketing in college, her response was immediate and cutting. "What kind of stable career is that? You're just playing with computers all day." Even when I landed internships at major advertising agencies and later secured positions with Fortune 500 companies, she would dismiss my work as not real business, like what your father and Justin do. No matter what I accomplished professionally, it was never substantial enough in her eyes. When I made the dean's list in college, she asked why I had not received a full scholarship like her friend's daughter. When I got promoted to senior marketing manager at 28, she wondered aloud why it had taken me so long to advance. Her praise, when it came at all, was always laced with criticism. your apartment looks expensive, but it must be lonely living by yourself at your age. Or, it's nice that your job pays well, but money's not everything, Avery. My father, Paul, represented a different kind of disappointment in my life. A quiet man who worked as a mid-level accountant, he seemed to genuinely care about me but lacked the courage to challenge my mother's harsh treatment. During particularly brutal family discussions, he might offer a weak, "Now, Maria," but would immediately back down if she turned her attention toward him. Sometimes he would slip me encouraging notes or make small supportive gestures, but only when my mother wasn't watching. Our relationship became increasingly distant as I entered my 30s. Phone conversations with him were brief and superficial, focused on weather updates and general news rather than anything meaningful about my life or feelings. I would occasionally catch glimpses of sadness in his eyes when he looked at me, as if he knew something fundamental was wrong with our family dynamic, but felt powerless to address it. The pattern of unequal treatment became most obvious during major life events. When I graduated summa cum laude with my marketing degree, neither parent attended the ceremony. My mother had a book club meeting she couldn't possibly reschedule, and my father claimed an urgent work deadline. I sat alone in that auditorium, watching other families celebrate together, pretending their absence didn't feel like a knife in my chest. When I launched my own digital marketing agency at 29 and was featured in Entrepreneur magazine as one of the 30 under 30 marketing innovators, I excitedly shared the news during our monthly family dinner. My mother glanced at the magazine for perhaps 30 seconds before changing the subject to Justin's new car lease. My achievement was forgotten before we finished our appetizers. Even our family photographs told the story of my outsider status. In the large portrait that dominated my parents' living room, Justin and Nicole stood directly behind our seated parents, while Bella perched perfectly on my mother's lap. I was positioned slightly to the left side, as if I had been added to the composition as an afterthought. Year after year, holiday after holiday, the same pattern continued. My accomplishments were minimized or ignored entirely. My presence was treated as an obligation rather than a joy. Family gatherings became exercises in invisibility where I would help serve food, take photos of everyone else, and listen to endless stories about my siblings' lives while rarely being asked about my own experiences or feelings. Despite all of this treatment, some deep part of me continued to hope for their acceptance. I kept showing up to every gathering, kept trying to prove my worth, kept believing that someday they would finally see me as I truly was. But as the years passed, that hope grew thinner, stretched nearly to its breaking point by the time I reached my early 30s. What my family never bothered to discover was that I had built something extraordinary, piece by careful piece, while they were busy ignoring me. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if toxic family dynamics during the holidays sound familiar, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up to family members who refuse to see your worth. What my family failed to see, or perhaps chose to ignore completely, was that I had built a life I was genuinely proud of, one strategic decision at a time. My career in digital marketing had not been handed to me on a silver platter like Justin's sales positions through family connections. It had been earned through countless late nights, rejected proposals, and the kind of persistence that my mother dismissed as stubbornness. After graduating from college, I started at a small marketing firm making barely enough to cover my studio apartment rent and student loan payments. I worked 12-hour days, building campaigns for local businesses while taking on freelance projects during weekends. My tiny apartment doubled as my office, with my computer setup taking up most of the living space. I survived on instant ramen and coffee, investing every spare dollar in better software and marketing tools. The first 3 years were brutal. I faced rejection after rejection from larger agencies and potential clients who wanted more experience than I could offer. But I kept pushing forward, refining my skills in search engine optimization, social media strategy, and data analytics. I started specializing in helping small businesses compete with larger corporations through targeted digital campaigns that maximized their limited budgets. By my 28th birthday, I had saved enough money to lease a small office space and officially launch Mitchell Marketing Solutions. It was nothing fancy, just a converted warehouse space with good lighting and enough room for me and two part-time contractors. But it was mine, built from nothing but determination and strategic thinking. The breakthrough came when I landed a contract with Pacific Northwest Breweries, a regional craft beer company looking to expand their market reach beyond Oregon and Washington. I worked 18-hour days for 3 months, creating a comprehensive digital strategy that honored their local roots while appealing to beer enthusiasts nationwide. The campaign exceeded every expectation, increasing their online sales by 57% in the first quarter and earning recognition from the American Marketing Association. That success led to bigger opportunities. Within 18 months, my client roster included 2 national restaurant chains and dozens of successful regional businesses. I had to move to a larger office and hire 8 full-time employees. My work was featured in Marketing Today magazine, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences across the country. By the time I turned 31, Mitchell Marketing Solutions was generating over $800,000 in annual revenue. I owned my downtown condominium outright, had a substantial retirement portfolio, and maintained an emergency fund that could cover 2 years of expenses. I paid myself a reasonable salary while reinvesting most profits back into the business, allowing for steady growth and better employee benefits. My personal life had also developed in ways my family never bothered to learn about. I had been in a committed relationship with David for nearly 4 years. He was a software engineer I met at a tech conference, someone who understood my drive and supported my ambitions without trying to diminish them. While we were not rushing toward marriage, we had built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals for the future. David understood my complicated family situation better than anyone. He provided the emotional support I had never received at home, celebrating my victories and helping me process the disappointments that came with running a business. When family gatherings left me drained and questioning my self-worth, David was always there to remind me of my actual accomplishments and value. I had also cultivated meaningful friendships with people who appreciated me for who I was rather than who they thought I should be. My college roommate Rachel lived just blocks away from my condo, and we had dinner together at least twice a week. My team at the marketing agency had become like a second family, celebrating birthdays and work anniversaries together, supporting each other through personal challenges and professional setbacks. Outside of work, I had developed interests that brought genuine joy to my life. I took photography classes on Thursday evenings, finding peace in capturing the beauty of Pacific Northwest landscapes. I volunteered monthly at a youth entrepreneurship program, helping teenagers from low-income neighborhoods develop business plans and marketing strategies. I had even started rock climbing, spending many weekends on the stunning cliffs outside Seattle, often with David or other rock climbing enthusiasts I had met. Yet despite all these accomplishments and the fulfilling life I had created, there remained an aching hollow space inside me. Some part of my heart still longed for my family's recognition, for them to see me as I truly was, rather than the disappointing middle child they had decided I was years earlier. This longing led me to make a decision that, looking back, only reinforced the toxic dynamic I was trying to escape. I became my family's silent financial safety net, always ready to help when emergencies arose, never expecting acknowledgement or gratitude in return. It started small, with a loan to my father when his car needed major transmission work. Then came assistance with Bella's college expenses when my parents claimed their savings were temporarily tied up in investments. The requests gradually increased in both frequency and amount, especially from my mother, who managed the household finances with an iron grip. The most significant financial support went to Justin, though this remained a secret from the rest of our family. Despite his outward appearance of success and his constant bragging about commission checks and business deals, my brother had made a series of catastrophic financial decisions. He had invested heavily in cryptocurrency at its peak, purchased a house well beyond his means, and maintained a lifestyle that required constant cash flow to sustain. 3 years ago, he had come to me in desperation, facing potential bankruptcy and the loss of his home. With tears in his eyes, he begged me to help save his marriage and his reputation in the community. I paid off his most pressing debts and established what I thought was a reasonable repayment plan, though he had managed only token payments since then. I also contributed substantially to family events and celebrations, often covering the entire cost while allowing my parents to take credit for their generosity. When my father needed new clothes for Nicole's wedding, I quietly purchased an entire wardrobe and let him believe he had found incredible sales at the department store. When my mother mentioned wanting to update their kitchen appliances, they mysteriously appeared as early anniversary gifts from the whole family, though my credit card was the only one charged. All of this financial support was provided discreetly, without fanfare or expectation of public gratitude. But rather than appreciation, the more I helped, the more my family seemed to view my support as an obligation, some form of repayment for the cost of raising me. My mother especially began treating my financial contributions not as generosity, but as a duty I owed them. During phone calls, she would make comments like, "Well, that is what family does for each other." Or more pointedly, "It is the least you can do considering everything we sacrificed for you growing up." Despite my professional success and financial stability, I continued to struggle with feelings of inadequacy whenever I was around my family. In their presence, I reverted to being the insecure teenager desperate for scraps of approval. I would downplay my achievements to avoid seeming boastful, accept criticism without defending myself, and swallow hurt feelings rather than risk causing conflict. David often questioned why I subjected myself to this treatment, why I kept attending family gatherings that left me emotionally exhausted, why I continued providing financial support without any recognition. I never had a satisfactory answer beyond the fact that they were family, and despite everything, I still loved them. But each passing year, each dismissive comment, each financial request disguised as family obligation, I could feel my patience wearing thinner and my resentment growing deeper. My self-respect was demanding more than I was receiving, and the gap between who I had become and how they treated me was becoming impossible to ignore. The financial dynamic between my family and me had evolved into something increasingly unhealthy over the years. What started as occasional assistance had transformed into an expected safety net, always available but never acknowledged or appreciated. My mother's phone calls followed a predictable script. She would begin with superficial questions about my business, barely listening to my responses before sighing heavily and mentioning some financial crisis. "The roof is leaking again and the contractor wants $3,000 up front," she would say. Or, "Your father's specialist appointments are not fully covered by insurance anymore." She never directly asked for money, instead dropping heavy hints until I offered to help, allowing her to maintain the illusion that she had not actually requested financial assistance. After accepting my help, she would quickly minimize it. "Well, that is what family is for." Or more pointedly, "It is about time you contributed something back to this household." There was never a genuine thank you, never an acknowledgement of the sacrifice or generosity involved. Instead, my financial contributions were reframed as obligations I owed rather than gifts I chose to give freely. This pattern extended beyond my parents to include all my siblings. Justin would call with stories about temporary cash flow problems, always promising to repay me next month, but somehow never managing to follow through. Nicole rarely asked directly for money, but would complain about the cost of raising 3 children until I offered to contribute to my nephew's education funds or buy them expensive gifts for holidays and birthdays. Bella had learned to expect that I would handle her financial emergencies without question, whether it was car repairs, rent payments when she had overspent on designer clothes, or credit card bills that have gotten out of control. In her mind, I was simply the successful sister who had money to spare, not someone making real sacrifices to help her. Family gatherings had become increasingly difficult to endure. Each holiday or celebration was marked by subtle criticism and not so subtle comparisons that left me feeling diminished and defensive. Last Thanksgiving had been particularly painful. Within minutes of arriving at my parents' house, my mother looked me up and down and asked if I had completely given up on finding a husband since I had arrived alone again. When I mentioned that I was actually in a serious 4-year relationship with David, she dismissed him as just another boyfriend and wondered aloud why I could not commit to marriage like Nicole had with her husband. During dinner, as I tried to share news about being named Pacific Northwest Marketing Professional of the Year, my mother interrupted to ask Nicole about her youngest son's piano lessons. But conversation never returned to my achievement. Later, as we cleaned dishes together, my mother remarked that it was probably for the best that I focused on my little computer business, since I was clearly not suited for motherhood anyway. I left that night with a pounding headache and a promise to myself that I would skip Christmas entirely. But as December approached, guilt and hope battled within me once again. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this year they would finally see me for who I really was. At my mother's 60th birthday celebration in early December, the familiar pattern continued. We gathered at an expensive restaurant that I had secretly paid for, while my father received credit for choosing such a nice venue. My mother spent the entire meal discussing my siblings' accomplishments while completely ignoring mine. When I mentioned that my agency had just signed its largest contract ever, worth over $200,000, she changed the subject to Bella's new part-time job at a local boutique, despite it being her 5th attempt at finding steady employment in 2 years. As Christmas Day approached, my anxiety reached new heights. I considered various excuses to avoid attending, but ultimately decided to go after several long conversations with David. "You need to stand up for yourself, Avery," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You are not that insecure kid anymore. You're a successful business owner who deserves basic respect from your own family." "They're never going to change," I argued, pacing around our living room. "Going there is just signing up for more of the same emotional abuse." "Then maybe it is time you changed how you respond," he countered. "You keep hoping they'll suddenly recognize your worth, but you need to show them that you know your own value, whether they acknowledge it or not." His words stayed with me in the days leading up to Christmas. I spent hours selecting thoughtful, expensive gifts for everyone, wrapping them perfectly, as if beautiful presentation could somehow make my family appreciate me more. I made appointments to have my hair and makeup done professionally, choosing an outfit that projected success and confidence, rather than my usual attempt to blend into the background. 2 days before Christmas, I received a phone call from Justin that would prove to be the final breaking point in an already strained situation. He sounded nervous, his voice lower than usual, as if he were calling from somewhere private where he wouldn't be overheard. "Avery, I hate to ask this, especially right before Christmas, but I'm in a really desperate situation," he began. I closed my eyes, already knowing what was coming next. "The bank is threatening foreclosure if I don't make a payment by December 31st. I need $18,000 to keep them from starting proceedings. I know it's a lot, but I pay you back as soon as my January commissions come through." $18,000. It was not an insignificant amount, even with my financial stability. It was money I had been saving for a major expansion of my agency, including hiring 3 new employees and leasing additional office space. "Justin, that is a substantial amount of money," I said carefully. "And you still owe me over $30,000 from previous loans that you have never repaid." I know," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. "But this is different. This is my house, Avery. Where will my family live if I lose it? Please, I'm begging you. You know I'm good for it eventually." After a long pause, during which I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line, I agreed to transfer the money. As I hung up the phone, I added this latest amount to the running total I kept of funds that would likely never be returned. That evening, I called Rachel, needing to vent my frustration to someone who would understand. "You've got to stop being their personal ATM," Rachel said bluntly after listening to my story. "These people are adults. Adults who should take responsibility for their own financial decisions instead of relying on their sister to bail them out repeatedly." But what was I supposed to do? Let Justin and his family become homeless right before Christmas? Maybe facing real consequences would force him to make better choices. And more importantly, when are you going to demand the respect you deserve? These people take and take from you, and they can't even be bothered to show basic appreciation or acknowledgement? As I prepared for bed that night, Rachel's words mixed with David's advice from earlier in the week. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge the anger I had been suppressing for so long. I was exhausted from being the family bank account, tired of having my success dismissed, tired of shrinking myself to avoid rocking the boat that never seemed to have room for me anyway. I made a decision as I drifted off to sleep. This Christmas would be different. I would not sit quietly and accept disrespect. I would not automatically offer financial help without acknowledgement. If they couldn't see my worth, I would show it to them clearly. And if that meant conflict, so be it. Some relationships needed to be broken before they could be rebuilt into something healthier. I arrived at my parents' suburban home at exactly 4 in the afternoon on Christmas Day. My car trunk filled with elegantly wrapped gifts that had cost me more than most people spent on rent. The modest 2-story house looked exactly as it had for the past 15 years, decorated with the same white lights outlining the windows and the same artificial wreath hanging on the front door. Taking a deep breath to steel my nerves, I gathered my composure along with the first load of presents and made my way up the familiar walkway. I could hear laughter and animated conversation from inside, sounds that momentarily made me question my resolve to finally stand up for myself. Part of me still longed to be genuinely included in those warm family moments rather than merely tolerated on the sidelines. My father answered the door, his face lighting up with what appeared to be sincere happiness at seeing me. "Avery, you made it," he said, stepping aside to let me enter. He was wearing his traditional Christmas sweater, the same burgundy one with snowflakes that my mother had given him at least 6 years ago. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I replied, managing a smile while shifting the packages in my arms to give him a brief hug. "There were gifts in the car. Could you help me bring them in?" His eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of additional presents, but he nodded and followed me back outside. As we retrieved the remaining packages, he made small talk about the unusually mild December weather and traffic conditions on the interstate, carefully avoiding anything personal or substantial. The inside of the house was warm and filled with the familiar smells of roasting turkey and cinnamon candles. The large Christmas tree dominated the living room, surrounded by presents that were already stacked 3 layers deep. Family photographs covered the mantel and side tables, mostly featuring Justin's achievements and Nicole's children, with only one small frame containing my college graduation photo from nearly a decade earlier. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron decorated with dancing reindeer. Her critical gaze immediately swept over me, taking in my designer dress, professionally styled hair, and the obvious expense of the gifts I was carrying. "You are finally here," she said, her tone suggesting I was late, despite arriving precisely at the time she had specified. "Put those under the tree and come say hello to everyone. Nicole brought her famous green bean casserole, and Justin is telling us about his promotion to regional sales manager." No warm greeting, no Merry Christmas, no comment on my appearance or the effort I had clearly made. I swallowed the familiar sting of disappointment and nodded, moving to arrange my gifts under the tree while my father disappeared back into the living room where the others had gathered. The next hour was a whirlwind of strained interactions and forced conversations. Nicole, impeccably dressed as always, gave me a quick hug before returning to her detailed story about her middle son's acceptance into the gifted and talented program at school. Justin clapped me on the shoulder with his characteristic overconfidence, though I noticed new stressed lines around his eyes and a tightness in his smile that had not been there the previous year. His wife Jennifer offered a sympathetic smile, one of the few genuine reactions I received upon arrival. Bella, home from her latest attempt at community college, barely looked up from her phone to acknowledge my presence with a distracted wave. When it came time to open gifts, I watched as my carefully selected presents were received with polite but muted appreciation. The expensive leather portfolio I had bought my father earned a brief thank you, though I suspect he did not realize it cost more than his monthly car payment. My mother admired the spa package and silk scarf I had given her for perhaps 30 seconds before setting them aside to coordinate the gift exchange for others. The limited edition items I had tracked down from my siblings were acknowledged with mild surprise, but quickly overshadowed by excitement from presents from other family members. It was as if my gifts existed in a separate category, appreciated in theory, but somehow less meaningful than contributions from everyone else. As we moved into the dining room for dinner, I found myself seated at the far end of the table, as far from my parents as possible. The positioning was not accidental. Justin and Nicole occupied the places of honor closest to our parents, with their spouses and children filling the middle seats. Bella sat at my mother's right hand, leaving me isolated at the opposite end with only my 8-year-old nephew beside me. The table was beautifully set, with my mother's best china and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier. The turkey was perfectly browned and surrounded by traditional sides: stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, and Nicole's famous green bean casserole, positioned prominently near my mother's place setting. Conversation flowed around me like water flowing around a stone in a stream. My mother asked detailed questions about Justin's work, nodding with obvious pride as he discussed potential bonuses and expanded territory, all of us pretending not to know about the $18,000 I had transferred to save his house just 2 days earlier. When he mentioned planning a luxury cruise for the following summer, I had to take a long sip of wine to keep from commenting on how this vacation reconciled with his desperate financial situation. Nicole dominated the next phase of conversation with stories about her children's accomplishments and her extensive volunteer work at their private school. My mother listened with rapt attention, frequently asking for more details about the fundraising committee she was chairing and the charity auction she was organizing. "You know, Avery, you should consider volunteering somewhere," she said, suddenly directing her attention towards me for the first time since we had sat down. "It would be good for you to get out and meet people, especially since you spend so much time alone with your computers." Before I could respond that I already volunteered regularly with the Youth Entrepreneurship Program, Nicole jumped in. "Oh, Mom, you know Avery is busy with her marketing thing. Not everyone has time for real community service." I took another sip of wine, reminding myself of my resolution to finally stand up for myself. "Actually, I volunteered twice a month with the program that helps teenagers develop business plans," I said, keeping my voice even and controlled. "My agency also provides free marketing services to several nonprofit organizations annually." There was a brief pause as this information registered. Then my mother simply said, "Well, that is nice," and immediately turned to Bella. "Tell everyone about your new job at the boutique, sweetheart." Bella launched into a description of her part-time retail position, which she had already complained to me about hating during our phone conversations. Nevertheless, my parents listened with complete attention, asking questions and offering encouragement, as if this minimum wage career development was the most fascinating career development they had ever heard of. When there was finally a lull in the conversation, I decided to share some significant news of my own. My agency was actually featured as the cover story in Pacific Business Journal last month, I said, trying to keep my tone casual and conversational. "They did a 6-page profile on our work with sustainable technology companies." "Oh, is that one of those free local magazines?" my mother asked dismissively, barely glancing in my direction. No, it's the most respected business publication in the Pacific Northwest. I corrected firmly. Being featured on the cover is considered a major achievement in the marketing industry. Speaking of achievements, my mother said, already turning away from me, Nicole, did you tell Avery that Emma made the honor roll again this semester? The conversation shifted once more, my professional recognition dismissed before it could even be properly acknowledged. I felt the familiar sting of invalidation, but reminded myself that their lack of understanding did not diminish the reality of my success. As dessert was being served, Justin unexpectedly brought the conversation back to my work. Wait, was that Pacific Business Journal article about that big tech rebranding you did? I think I saw something about it on LinkedIn. Surprised by his interest, I nodded. Yes, we completely redesigned the visual identity and digital strategy for 3 major sustainable technology companies. It was an 8-month project that involved everything from logo design to comprehensive social media campaigns. That is actually pretty impressive, Avery, he said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in years. Those companies are huge players in the green energy sector. Thank you, I replied, genuinely touched by this rare acknowledgement from a family member. It was the first positive comment about my work I had received from anyone at the table. My mother frowned deeply, clearly displeased by the direction of the conversation. I am sure they did not pay much for some new logos and website designs, she said coldly. Now, who wants coffee with their pie? I felt heat rising in my cheeks and my hands beginning to shake slightly. Actually, Mom, it was a complete strategic rebranding that increased their combined market visibility by 63%. The total contract value was over $400,000. A heavy silence fell over the entire table. My father looked up from his dessert plate with raised eyebrows, while Nicole stopped mid-bite, her fork suspended in the air. Even Bella put down her phone, sensing the sudden tension in the room. My mother's expression hardened into the familiar mask of disapproval I had seen countless times throughout my childhood. There is no need to exaggerate, Avery. We all know marketing is just a step above making flyers for garage sales. You have always been prone to embellishing your accomplishments. I am not exaggerating, I said firmly, my voice gaining strength with each word. My business employs 15 people full-time and generates over $800,000 in annual revenue. I own my condominium outright and have more in savings than most people earn in 5 years. My mother put down her fork with a sharp clink against the china plate, the sound echoing in the silent quiet of the dining room. Her eyes narrowed as she looked directly at me with unmistakable contempt. If you are doing so remarkably well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, why are you still single and living alone at 32? Why do you not have a family and children like Nicole? Real success is not just about money, Avery. Frankly, I have always thought you inflate your accomplishments because you have nothing else meaningful to show for your life. I sat perfectly still, feeling as if I had been physically slapped. The words hung in the air like poison, and I could see the discomfort on everyone else's faces as they witnessed this brutal character assassination. My condominium is 3,000 square feet in downtown Seattle, Mom. You have never even bothered to visit it, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away an annoying insect. The point is, at your age, you should have something more substantial to show for your life than some computer work and an expensive apartment. Nicole has given us 3 beautiful grandchildren. Justin has built a respected career in sales. Even Bella is finding her path in retail management. The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably, finally finding his voice. Nancy, perhaps this is not the appropriate time or place for this discussion. But my mother was far from finished. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to that quietly vicious tone I remembered from childhood punishments. Let us be completely honest here, Avery. You have always been different, always living in your own little fantasy world. We tried to guide you toward a more conventional, respectable path, but you insisted on this artsy computer lifestyle. She caused for effect, making sure she had everyone's complete attention. And what do you really have to show for it? No husband, no children, just clients who could replace you tomorrow with someone younger and cheaper. You spend your days playing with websites while your sister is raising the next generation and your brother is building something that actually matters. I stared at her, barely breathing, as decades of accumulated hurt and disappointment crystallized into perfect, painful clarity. This is who she truly was. This is who they all were in their own ways. And no amount of success on my part would ever change their fundamental inability to see or value me. But my mother was not finished delivering her verdict. She straightened in her chair, her voice now carrying that final, judgmental tone that I remembered from every major disappointment of my childhood. "The truth is," she said, her words falling like stones into still water, "you are the most useless child we have." The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. Justin stared down at his plate as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Nicole stopped mid-bite, her fork suspended in the air. Even Bella put down her phone, sensing the sudden tension in the room. But something fundamental had shifted inside me in that moment. It was not my spirit that broke under the weight of those cruel words. It was the chain of silence and accommodation that had bound me to this toxic dynamic for over 30 decades. I slowly stood up from my chair, my napkin falling forgotten to the floor. The chair made a harsh, scraping sound against the hardwood that seemed to echo in the silent room. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, no longer afraid of her judgment or disapproval. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, clear, and filled with the strength I had never known I possessed. "Then stop calling me when you need money." The silence that followed my words was absolutely suffocating. My mother's face drained of all color, her mouth falling open in shock as if I had physically struck her. Her usual composure completely shattered, leaving behind a woman who looked genuinely vulnerable for the first time in my memory. My father attempted to rise from his chair, confusion and alarm cycling rapidly across his features. "Avery, what are you talking about?" he asked, though the uncertainty in his voice suggested he already suspected the answer. Justin continued staring fixedly at his plate, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. His wife Jennifer looked between us with dawning comprehension, her eyes finally settling on her husband with the question she was afraid to voice aloud. Nicole sat frozen, her fork still suspended halfway to her mouth, her perfect composure cracking as she began to understand the implications of what I had just revealed. Her husband reached for her hand, equally confused by the sudden shift in conversation. Bella was the first to break the stunned silence, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "Avery," she whispered, sounding suddenly much younger than her 25 years. "What do you mean?" But I was not finished. Years of suppressed frustration and accumulated resentment came pouring out, unstoppable now that the dam had finally burst. "Let me tell you all what useless actually looks like," I continued, my voice gaining power and conviction with each word. "Useless is not the person who built a successful business from absolutely nothing. Useless is not the person who paid for Dad's transmission repairs last spring when it cost $4,000. Useless is not the person who covered 3/4 of Bella's tuition when you claimed your savings were tied up in bad investments." I turned to face Justin directly, who still refused to look up from his plate. "And useless is definitely not the person who has prevented your house from being foreclosed on 4 separate times, Justin. $18,000 just 2 days ago, on top of the $42,000 you already owed me from previous emergencies." Jennifer gasped audibly, turning to stare at her husband with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Justin, is that true? You told me your bonus covered the mortgage payment this month. Justin finally looked up, his face a mask of shame and desperation. Avery, you promised not to say anything, he muttered weakly. No, what I did was enable you to keep lying to your wife and everyone else about your actual financial situation. I allowed you to maintain your facade of success while I quietly cleaned up your messes behind the scenes. I turned back to address my mother, whose shock was rapidly transforming into indignant anger. You have called me at least twice a month for the past 4 years asking for financial help, Mom. The new washing machine and dryer set, I paid for them. Dad's cardiac specialist appointments that insurance would not cover? Also me. The roof repairs last summer that cost $8,000. That was me too. My voice grew stronger as I continued my revelations. I have given this family over $120,000 in the past 4 years alone, and not once has anyone bothered to say thank you. Not once has anyone acknowledged that my supposedly useless computer business has been keeping this family financially stable. My father sank back into his chair heavily, his face ashen with shock and what looked like genuine remorse. Avery, I had no idea about any of this. Your mother told me those expenses were covered by our emergency fund or insurance claims. Of course you did not know, Dad. No one was supposed to know. It was our family's best-kept secret that the disappointing daughter was actually the one everyone turned to when they needed financial rescue. Sarah found her voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. But you never said anything when we asked for help. You always acted like it was no big deal when we needed assistance. Because I desperately wanted to be valued by this family, I admitted, feeling suddenly exposed and vulnerable. I thought if I could just be useful enough, generous enough, successful enough, maybe someday you would actually see me for who I am. But that was never going to happen, was it? I looked around the table at their stunned faces, feeling strangely calm now that the truth was finally out in the open. I have a business that employs 15 people and generates close to $1 million annually. I own my home completely, have substantial savings and investments, and I'm building toward early retirement. I volunteer regularly, have wonderful friends, and am in a loving relationship with the men that none of you have ever bothered to meet despite 4 years together. I paused, letting this information sink in before delivering my final point. By any objective measure of success, I am not just doing well, I'm thriving. But in this family, none of that has ever mattered because I did not follow the exact path that was prescribed for me. My mother's shock was finally giving way to familiar anger, her jaw setting in that stubborn line I remember from childhood confrontations. You have no right to air our private family business like this, she said coldly. If you chose to help family members financially, that is what families do for each other. It does not give you the right to throw it back in our faces like some kind of weapon. No, Mom, I replied firmly, but without cruelty. What healthy families do is support each other both emotionally and financially. What normal families do is celebrate each other's successes and provide comfort during failures. What loving families do is see each other as complete human beings, not as disappointments who failed to meet arbitrary expectations. I took a deep breath, suddenly feeling exhausted by the confrontation, but knowing I needed to finish what I had started. For 32 years, I have been trying to earn your approval and love by being the family problem solver and financial safety net. I finally realized that approach was never going to work because you do not want a successful daughter. You want a compliant one who fits your narrow definition of what my life should look like. The truth about Justin's financial situation continued to create ripples of shock around the table. Jennifer was whispering urgently to him, her voice a mixture of hurt and anger. "You told me we were financially secure," I heard her say. "We just bought that new car last month. How much debt are we actually carrying?" "We have to maintain appearances," he hissed back, no longer bothering to keep his voice down. "So our entire lifestyle is built on lies and money borrowed from your sister?" She shot back, her voice rising with each word. Nicole was looking increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued to unravel. "Avery, I honestly had no idea you were supporting everyone financially like this. You should have said something sooner. We could have discussed this as a family." "Would it have made any difference?" I asked her directly. "Would you have suddenly started treating me with respect instead of condescension? Would Mom have stopped comparing me unfavorably to you at every possible opportunity?" Nicole had the grace to look genuinely ashamed. "I never meant to make you feel less valuable than me," she said softly. "I guess I just got comfortable being the favorite daughter and never questioned why that was fair or right." Bella was openly crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Did you really pay for most of my college tuition?" she asked through her tears. "Mom and Dad told me they had taken out loans and were struggling to afford it." I nodded, feeling a rush of sympathy for my youngest sister, who had been as much a victim of our family's dysfunctional patterns as I had been. "They did not want you to feel guilty or obligated. They preferred that you think they were making financial sacrifices rather than accepting help from me." My father stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped with what appeared to be genuine shame. "Avery is absolutely right," he said, his voice stronger than I had heard it in years. "We have not been honest with ourselves or each other, and we have treated our daughter terribly unfairly." He looked directly at my mother, who stared back in complete disbelief. "Maria, our daughter deserves a sincere apology from all of us, but especially from you." But my mother was not ready to concede anything. Her shock had fully transformed into defensive anger. "This is completely ridiculous," she snapped. "If Avery chose to help family members financially, that was her decision to make. No one forced her to do anything. And if she feels unappreciated, perhaps she should consider that giving money with the expectation of gratitude is not really generosity at all." Her response confirmed everything I had already suspected. There would be no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no genuine apology, no meaningful change in her behavior. Not today, and quite possibly not ever. I nodded slowly, finally accepting this painful reality. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Mom. No one forced me to help this family financially. I chose to do it because I love all of you, despite how you have treated me over the years. But I am making a different choice now." Without another word, I walked away from the table and headed upstairs to the guest bedroom where I had left my overnight bag. The room remained exactly as it had been during my teenage years, with the same lavender bedspread and posters of bands I had outgrown decades ago. It felt like a museum dedicated to a person who no longer existed. I quickly gathered my belongings while hearing raised voices from downstairs as my revelations continued to create chaos among the remaining family members. Part of me felt guilty for disrupting Christmas dinner so dramatically, but a stronger part of me felt an overwhelming sense of relief that the truth was finally out in the open. Whether they chose to address these revelations constructively or continue living in denial was now their decision to make, not my responsibility to manage. As I came back downstairs with my bag, my father intercepted me in the hallway outside the dining room. The voices from inside had grown louder and more heated as the family continued processing my bombshell revelations. "Avery, please do not leave like this," he pleaded, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. "We can talk through all of this. We can find a way to fix what has been broken." I looked at him with genuine compassion, seeing perhaps for the first time the pain he had been carrying for years. "Dad, this cannot be fixed with one conversation. This dysfunction has been building for decades. I need space right now to process everything, and honestly, I think the family needs time to deal with the truth without me here to complicate things." "I had no idea about any of the money," he said quietly, tears forming in his eyes. "About how much you were helping everyone? About how your mother was treating you? I knew things were not perfect between you two, but I did not realize how bad it had become." "I know, Dad," I said gently, reaching out to touch his arm. "And that is part of the problem. You have been choosing not to see the reality of our family dynamic for a very long time because it was easier than confronting Mom about her behavior." He nodded sadly, acknowledging the truth of my words. Then he surprised me by pulling me into a tight, desperate hug. "I am so proud of what you have accomplished," he whispered into my ear. "I should have told you that more often. I should have defended you when your mother was being unfair. I failed you as a father, and I am truly sorry." I hugged him back, feeling a complex mixture of love, sadness, and cautious hope. When we separated, I could see tears streaming down his cheeks that mirrored my own. From the dining room, I could hear my mother's voice rising in continued indignation, Justin and Jennifer arguing in increasingly harsh whispers, and what sounded like Nicole attempting unsuccessfully to restore some kind of order to the chaos. It was the sound of a carefully constructed facade finally crumbling under the weight of suppressed truths that had been festering for years. Without saying anything more to my father, I walked to the front door, stepped out into the cold December evening, and closed it firmly behind me. In my car, I sat for several minutes with my hands gripping the steering wheel, letting out a long, shaky breath that seemed to carry years of accumulated tension with it. As I drove away from my childhood home, Christmas lights blurring through my tears, I felt something completely unexpected. Not regret or anger, but a profound sense of freedom and liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my complete truth without apology or compromise. Whatever happened next in my relationships with my family members, I would face it as my authentic self, no longer contorting myself into shapes designed to make other people comfortable at my own expense. The drive back to my condominium felt surreal and dreamlike. Christmas lights twinkled from houses and storefronts, holiday music played softly on the radio, and the world continued operating normally while my personal reality had been completely transformed. Tears came in waves throughout the drive, not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming release of emotions I had contained for so many years. It felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 3 decades. When I arrived home, I sat in my parking garage for several more minutes, gathering the emotional strength to go inside and face the aftermath of what had just occurred. My phone had been buzzing constantly in my purse throughout the drive, but I had not yet looked at the messages. Part of me wanted to throw the phone away and never deal with the consequences of my confrontation. Finally, I made my way upstairs to my condo, dropping my keys and overnight bag by the entrance before collapsing onto my sofa. Only then did I check my phone to find 17 calls and 29 text messages, a digital avalanche of family fallout. The first call I returned was to David. He answered immediately, concern evident in his voice even before he spoke. "Avery, are you okay? I have been worried sick since you were supposed to call after dinner hours ago." I tried to explain what had happened, but my voice broke and fresh tears came as I attempted to recount the evening's events. I did it, David. I finally stood up to them and told them exactly how I felt. But it was so much more intense and painful than I had imagined it would be. He listened patiently and supportively as I recounted everything from my mother's cruel final insult to my explosive response revealing years of hidden financial support. When I finished my story, there was a moment of thoughtful silence before he responded. "I am incredibly proud of you," he said finally, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "What you did tonight took tremendous courage. Standing up to family dysfunction is one of the hardest things anyone can do." "It does not feel like courage right now," I admitted, wiping my eyes with the tissue. "It feels like I just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of my family on Christmas Day." "Maybe that kind of explosion was exactly what needed to happen," he suggested gently. "Sometimes toxic systems have to be completely disrupted before they can be rebuilt into something healthier and more functional." We talked for nearly an hour and a half, his calm perspective and unwavering support helping me process the swirling emotions and second-guessing that kept cycling through my mind. When we finally ended the call, he offered to come over immediately, but I declined, needing time alone to collect my thoughts and figure out my next steps. After a long, hot shower and change into comfortable clothes, I returned to my phone, steeling myself to face the barrage of messages from my family members. I decided to read the text messages rather than listen to voicemails, not yet emotionally ready to hear the actual voices of my family members processing this dramatic shift in our relationships. Bella's messages came first, a series of increasingly emotional texts that showed genuine remorse and self-reflection. "Avery, are you okay? Please call me when you can. I had no idea about the tuition money. I feel terrible that you were helping me, and I never even thanked you. Mom is completely losing it downstairs. Dad took her to their bedroom after you left. I never realized how differently they treated you compared to the rest of us. I was so wrapped up in my own problems that I never paid attention. I love you, and I am so sorry for taking you for granted all these years." Her messages were the most straightforward and genuinely apologetic, which did not surprise me. Of all my siblings, Bella had the least investment in maintaining our family's dysfunctional patterns and the most capacity for honest self-examination. Justin had sent only 3 brief messages, focused entirely on damage control rather than addressing the underlying issues or taking any responsibility. "We need to discuss this privately before you say anything else to anyone. Jennifer is extremely upset and asking questions I cannot answer right now. Thanks for ruining Christmas for everyone. This could have been handled differently." His response was exactly what I had expected: deflection, blame, and concern only for how my revelations affected his carefully maintained image of success. Nicole had sent the longest and most complex series of messages, showing a mixture of shock, defensiveness, and what appeared to be genuine self-reflection. "I am honestly in shock about everything you revealed tonight. I had no idea you were supporting everyone financially. Mom went upstairs and has been crying for the past hour. Dad is trying to calm her down, but she keeps saying you humiliated her in front of everyone. I know we have not always been close as sisters, but I want you to know that I have always respected your independence, even if I did not always show it. Looking back now, I can see how Mom always compared us and made you feel like you were not meeting her expectations. I got so used to being praised that I never questioned whether it was fair to you. I think I have been jealous of your freedom and success for years, if I'm being completely honest. You built something impressive entirely on your own. Can we talk sometime soon? I would like to understand your perspective better and figure out how to move forward as a family." That last message surprised me significantly. Nicole expressing jealousy of my life and accomplishments was something I had never considered possible. She had always seemed so confident and satisfied with her traditional path of marriage and motherhood. There was a single text from my father, simple but heartfelt. "I failed you as a father, and I am deeply sorry. You deserved so much better from all of us, especially me. I love you, and I am proud of the woman you have become." Notably absent was any message from my mother, which was not surprising, but still stung despite everything that had happened. I turned off my phone after reading through all the messages, not yet ready to respond to any of them. Instead, I wrapped myself in a soft blanket on my sofa, staring at my small Christmas tree in the corner with its lights blinking steadily in the darkness of my living room. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through my windows and a strange sense of lightness that I had not experienced in years. Despite the emotional turmoil of the previous day, I had slept more deeply and peacefully than I had in months, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my subconscious mind. I made coffee and checked my phone to find that Bella had sent a long email overnight rather than additional text messages. She wrote thoughtfully about how she had always looked up to me, but had been unconsciously influenced by our mother's dismissive attitude toward my choices and achievements. She apologized sincerely for taking my financial help for granted and promised to be more aware of family dynamics going forward. Her words showed a maturity and emotional intelligence that I had not given her credit for in the past. There was also an email from my father, longer and more detailed than his brief text message. He explained that he and my mother had argued late into the night, with him finally confronting her directly about her treatment of me over the years. He admitted to his own cowardice in not standing up for me sooner, and asked for an opportunity to rebuild our relationship on more honest and respectful terms. He ended by saying he was genuinely proud of the successful businesswoman I had become, words I had longed to hear from him for decades. The most surprising communication came from Justin in the form of a bank transfer notification, rather than words. $5,000 had been deposited into my account, with the memo line reading, "First real repayment, more coming soon." It was a relatively small fraction of what he owed me, but the acknowledgement meant more than the actual money. Over the following weeks, I maintained careful distance from my family while processing everything that had happened. I responded selectively to messages and calls, establishing boundaries that would have been unthinkable before my Christmas confrontation. I told Bella I'd be happy to talk with her when she returned to Seattle after the New Year holidays. I thanked Justin for the partial loan repayment, but declined his suggestion that we should just move past this whole situation and pretend nothing had changed. I arranged to meet with my father for coffee in January at a neutral location away from my mother's influence and potential interference. David was my anchor through this difficult period, offering consistent support without trying to push me toward any particular course of action. "This is your journey and your decision to make," he reminded me repeatedly. "I am here to support you regardless of what you choose to do about these relationships." My best friend Rachel was more direct in her assessment when we met for our weekly dinner. "It is about damn time," she declared, raising her wine glass in a toast. "Here's to Avery, who finally found her voice and used it to speak the truth." "I'm still not completely sure I did the right thing," I admitted, still second-guessing my dramatic Christmas revelation. "Sometimes the right thing and the comfortable thing are completely different," Rachel replied firmly. "Your family has been comfortable with their version of reality for years, while you have been suffocating under the weight of their expectations and financial demands. Maybe some serious discomfort is exactly what they needed to wake up." In January, I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who specialized in family systems and toxic relationship patterns. Our sessions helped me understand that my Christmas confrontation had not created the family dysfunction. It had merely exposed problems that had existed for decades. "Your mother exhibits classic narcissistic behaviors," Dr. Martinez explained during one of our early sessions. She created a family system where everyone played assigned roles to maintain her vision of how things should be. You disrupted that system by refusing to play your designated role as the underachieving daughter who needed constant guidance. So what happens now? I asked, still feeling uncertain about the path forward. That depends partly on you and partly on them, she replied thoughtfully. You cannot control how your family members respond to this new reality, but you can decide what kind of relationships you are willing to accept moving forward. With Dr. Martinez's guidance, I began establishing clear, non-negotiable boundaries for any future interactions with my family. I would no longer automatically provide financial assistance when requested without discussion and acknowledgement. I would expect basic respect and recognition of my accomplishments as a successful businesswoman. I would not subject myself to criticism, comparisons, or attempts to make me feel guilty for my life choices. Most importantly, I would no longer diminish myself or my achievements to make other people feel comfortable. The process was neither easy nor linear. There were difficult conversations, emotional setbacks, and moments of doubt when I questioned whether maintaining relationships with my family was worth the ongoing effort and pain. My mother remained largely resistant to any meaningful change, clinging desperately to her narrative that I was being selfish and overly sensitive about normal family interactions. Through my father, I learned that she was telling friends and extended family members that I had suffered some kind of breakdown and was being influenced by a manipulative boyfriend who was turning me against my own family. But incremental positive changes began occurring in my relationships with other family members who were more willing to examine their own behavior and make adjustments. Justin, facing the stark reality of his financial situation without my automatic safety net, finally began having honest conversations with Jennifer about their debt and unsustainable lifestyle. They downsized to a more affordable home, traded in their expensive cars for practical used vehicles, and began working with a financial counselor to develop a realistic budget and repayment plan. Our relationship remained somewhat strained, but there was a new honesty between us that felt like genuine progress. Nicole and I began developing what felt like a real friendship for the first time in our adult lives. Without our mother's constant comparisons driving us apart, we discovered common interests and genuine mutual respect. She confessed that her seemingly perfect domestic life had its own significant challenges and pressures, while I shared more details about my business struggles and successes. We started having regular coffee dates where we could talk openly without family politics interfering. Bella returned to college with renewed determination and a completely different attitude toward financial responsibility. She no longer took support for granted and began asking thoughtful questions about career planning and business development. She started visiting my office regularly, showing genuine curiosity about my work and occasionally asking for advice about her own professional goals. Our 7-year age difference, which had always made us feel like strangers, now seemed much less significant as we related to each other as adults. My father made perhaps the most dramatic changes of anyone. He began standing up to my mother more frequently, refusing to enable her manipulative behavior or dismissive attitude toward me. He visited my office and spent time getting to know David, showing authentic interest in my life for the first time I could remember. During one particularly meaningful conversation, he admitted that he had always admired my creativity and independence, but had been too intimidated by my mother's strong opinions to express his support openly. Throughout these months of family recalibration, I continued focusing on my own personal growth and happiness. My business continued thriving and expanding, my relationship with David deepened and became even stronger, and I developed new confidence in social and professional situations that had previously caused me anxiety. I began speaking at marketing conferences around the country, sharing my expertise with other professionals and building my reputation as a thought leader in digital strategy. I started mentoring young entrepreneurs through a formal program, finding great satisfaction in helping others avoid some of the mistakes I had made earlier in my career. I even began teaching an evening course at the local business school, discovering that I had both a talent for and genuine enjoyment of education. The most profound change, however, was internal and psychological. I no longer measured my self-worth by my family's approval or lack thereof. I no longer felt compelled to earn love through financial support or professional accomplishments. I began to truly believe what I had intellectually known for years, that I was successful, capable, and worthy of respect simply for being who I was, regardless of anyone else's opinions or expectations. When David proposed to me in late spring, I accepted with pure joy, uncomplicated by worries about family reactions or concerns about fitting into anyone else's vision of what my life should look like. We planned a wedding that would reflect our own values and desires rather than trying to meet external expectations or avoid potential conflicts. When inevitable questions arose about guest lists and family roles in our ceremony, I made decisions based on what felt authentic and right to me, rather than what would cause the least drama or controversy. By summer, I had not spoken directly to my mother in over 8 months. Through my father and other family members, I knew that she remained angry about what she called my public humiliation of the family and was still unwilling to acknowledge her role in creating the dysfunctional dynamic that had damaged our relationship. While part of me continued hoping for some form of reconciliation, I had accepted that it might never happen on terms that would be healthy or sustainable for me. What surprised me most about this period of estrangement was not the pain, which I had anticipated, but the profound sense of relief and emotional freedom that came with it. Without the constant drain of trying to earn my mother's approval, I had significantly more emotional energy available for people and activities that actually brought joy and fulfillment to my life. The absence of regular toxic interactions created space for more positive relationships to flourish, and I found myself happier and more at peace than I had been in years. The following Christmas approached with a mixture of anxiety and cautious hope. I had maintained varying levels of contact with different family members throughout the year, but had not yet decided whether to attend any kind of family gathering for the holidays. David supported whatever decision I chose to make, offering to spend the holidays just the two of us or with my chosen family of close friends if that would be more comfortable and peaceful. After extensive consideration and several productive sessions with Dr. Martinez, I decided to take a calculated risk and attend a small family gathering, but with crucial differences from previous years. I would stay at a hotel rather than my childhood home. I would bring David and insist that he be treated as an important part of my life rather than ignored or dismissed. Most importantly, I would arrive with clear boundaries and the absolute willingness to leave immediately if those boundaries were violated. Think of it as an experiment in your new family dynamic, Dr. Martinez suggested. You're not returning to old patterns, but testing whether healthier ones might be possible under these new circumstances. When David and I arrived at my parents' house on Christmas Eve, the atmosphere was noticeably different from previous years. My father greeted us warmly at the door, embracing both of us with what felt like genuine affection and pleasure. Bella rushed forward next, her face lighting up with excitement at seeing us both. Nicole offered a smile that seemed tentative but sincere. Her husband and children lined up behind her with curious but friendly expressions. Justin nodded respectfully in our direction, a marked change from his previous dismissive attitude toward my relationships. My mother stood slightly apart from the group, her expression carefully controlled and neutral. Through my father, she had agreed to certain conditions for the holiday gathering: no criticism of my life choices, no dismissive comments about my career, and basic respect for David as my chosen partner. So far, she appeared to be complying with these requirements, though her rigid posture suggested it was not easy for her. "Welcome, Avery," she said formally, extending her hand to David with obvious effort. "And welcome to our home, David. Paul has told me a great deal about your work in software development." It was not warm or enthusiastic, but it was civil and respectful, which represented significant progress from her previous complete dismissal of my personal relationships. The evening proceeded with an atmosphere that was somewhat cautious and awkward, but notably free from hostility or drama. Conversation flowed more democratically than in previous years, with each person given space to share their news and experiences without immediate criticism or interruption. When I mentioned that my agency had been selected as Digital Marketing Firm of the Year by the Pacific Northwest Business Association, there were actual congratulations and follow-up questions rather than swift changes of subject. When David talked about his latest software project, everyone listened with apparent interest and asked thoughtful questions about his work. My mother remained largely quiet throughout dinner, speaking mainly when directly addressed or when coordinating the meal service. I caught her watching me several times with an expression I could not quite interpret, somewhere between curiosity and confusion, as if she were absorbing a stranger who happened to live in her daughter's body. After dinner, as others moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, my mother asked if I would help her clean up in the kitchen. Wary but willing to see where this led, I agreed to assist her. For several minutes, we worked in silence, loading the dishwasher and storing leftovers in containers. The kitchen had always been her domain, and I felt the familiar tension of being in her space under her watchful supervision. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice softer and less certain than I was accustomed to hearing. "You look well, Avery," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your business seems to be doing very well." "It is," I replied simply, not sure where she was heading with this conversation. "Thank you for noticing." Another stretch of silence followed, filled with the sounds of running water and clinking dishes. She closed the refrigerator and turned to face me directly, something vulnerable flickering across her features. "I want you to know that I have been talking to someone, a counselor. Your father insisted after everything that happened last Christmas." This was perhaps the last thing I had expected her to say. My mother, who had always viewed therapy as something for weak people who couldn't handle their own problems, was seeing a professional counselor. "That sounds like a positive step," I managed to respond, genuinely surprised by this development. "I do not agree with everything she tells me," my mother continued, with a hint of her familiar stubbornness returning. "But she has made me think about certain things differently, about control and expectations." She straightened a dish towel with unnecessary precision. "About why I felt like I needed everyone to follow specific paths in life." I remained quiet, sensing that interrupting might derail whatever difficult admission she was working toward. "I was raised to believe there was only one correct way to live," she said eventually, her voice barely above a whisper. "College, marriage, children. In that exact order. Success meant financial security and social respectability. Anything different felt like failure or rebellion." She glanced at me briefly before looking away again. "When you chose such a different path, I interpreted it as rejection of everything I valued and everything I had tried to teach you about life." "It was not rejection, Mom," I said quietly. "It was just me finding my own way to build a life that made sense for me." She nodded stiffly, as if this was difficult for her to accept, but not impossible. "My counselor has suggested something similar, that your choices were about you discovering who you are, not about you rejecting me. Apparently, I have a tendency to make everything about myself and my own feelings." This level of self-awareness, however reluctant, was startling coming from her. I was not sure how to respond appropriately, so I simply waited for her to continue. "I am not going to apologize for wanting what I believed was best for you," she said, her chin lifting slightly in a gesture of familiar defiance. "But I can acknowledge that I was inflexible in my expectations and that I said hurtful things that I should not have said." It was not exactly a full apology, but coming from my mother, it represented an unprecedented level of acknowledgement and self-reflection. "Thank you for telling me this," I said finally. "It means a great deal to hear you say that." She nodded once, sharply, as if concluding a difficult business negotiation. "Your David seems like a stable, responsible man," she offered, clearly attempting to change the subject to safer ground. "He is," I agreed. "He's also creative, supportive, and makes me laugh every single day." A faint, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. "Good. That is important in a partnership." She hesitated for a moment, then added something I had never expected to hear from her. "I would like to see your office sometime, if that would be acceptable to you. I realize I have never actually seen where you work or what your business looks like." The olive branch was small but significant, representing a level of interest in my life that she had never expressed before. "I would like that very much," I replied honestly. We rejoined the others in the living room, the atmosphere between us not exactly warm, but noticeably less tense than it had been in years. As I settled beside David on the sofa, he squeezed my hand questioningly, and I squeezed back, a silent message that things were progressing better than expected. The rest of the evening passed peacefully, with none of the drama, hurt feelings, or emotional exhaustion that had characterized so many previous family gatherings. When David and I left for our hotel, there were genuine hugs and promises to stay in touch more regularly that felt like they might actually be kept this time. In our hotel room that night, David asked about my kitchen conversation with my mother. After I recounted her unexpected admissions and tentative peace offerings, he looked thoughtful and cautiously optimistic. "It is not exactly a tearful reconciliation scene from a movie," he observed with gentle humor. "No," I agreed with a laugh. "But from my mother, acknowledging that she might have been wrong about anything represents a seismic shift in perspective. I never imagined I would live to see the day when she would admit to being inflexible." "Do you think the changes will actually stick?" he asked seriously. "Do you believe your family relationships can really become healthier moving forward?" I considered his question carefully before responding. "I think they already have changed, just not perfectly or completely. There's enough improvement to make real relationships possible for the first time in my adult life. Different kinds of relationships than we had before, with space for me to be myself and for them to be who they are without the constant conflict." In the months that followed, this tentative new equilibrium continued developing and strengthening. My mother kept her promise to visit my office, making a visible effort to understand and appreciate the scope of my business operations. We established a pattern of monthly lunch meetings that were sometimes awkward, but increasingly genuine and respectful. She would probably never fully understand or approve of all my life choices, but she was learning to respect them, and I was learning to accept her limitations without taking them as personal attacks or rejections. My relationships with my siblings continued evolving in overwhelmingly positive directions. Justin successfully paid back the majority of what he owed me, accompanied not just by money, but by genuine gratitude and newfound respect for my success. Nicole and I discovered shared interests in sustainable living and social entrepreneurship that gave us common ground beyond our complicated family history. Bella graduated from college with a business degree and even completed a summer internship at my agency, displaying surprising talent for client relations and strategic planning. My father became one of my most vocal supporters and advocates. He proudly displayed my industry awards in his office, introduced me to his friends as my daughter, the successful entrepreneur, and made it clear through countless small actions that he valued and respected me exactly as I was. The journey of that transformative year taught me lessons I carry with me every day. I learned that speaking difficult truths, however painful in the moment, is ultimately less damaging than living with ongoing deception and resentment. I learned that genuine love does not require you to diminish yourself to accommodate other people's insecurities or unrealistic expectations. Most importantly, I learned that family relationships can be renegotiated and redefined as we grow and change as individuals. Sometimes you have to risk losing the family you have always known in order to gain the family that might be possible. That confrontation at Christmas dinner, terrifying as it was in the moment, proved necessary to disrupt the toxic patterns that had trapped all of us for decades. But temporary pain and chaos made possible a deeper healing process that would never have occurred otherwise. Looking around the table at our most recent family gathering, held at my condo with everyone contributing dishes and conversation, I felt a profound sense of peace and accomplishment. The family before me was not perfect. We still had occasional tensions, misunderstandings, and moments of falling back into old habits, but we were all trying, in our different ways, to create something healthier and more authentic than what we had maintained before. My mother caught my eye from across the table and offered a small, genuine smile that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. In that moment, I understood that sometimes we must risk losing family as we have known it in order to gain family as it could potentially become. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to stop accepting the unacceptable, even when doing so initially feels like betrayal or abandonment. As I raised my glass to toast the holiday, I looked at the faces of those I had fought so hard to be seen and valued by, and realized that the most important recognition had ultimately come from within myself. The journey had never really been about gaining their approval, but about claiming my own worth and standing firmly in the knowledge of who I was, regardless of who others thought I should become. Have you ever had to confront family members who refused to see your true worth? How did you find the courage to set boundaries that protected your self-respect? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and the courage it takes to demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply be yourself, unapologetically and completely.